You're the guy people call when they need a helping hand, moving furniture, unloading a truck. But lately, your shoulder's been acting up, and you're the one who's calling for help. And that's the moment you realize you can no longer shoulder the load.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for orthopedic care, with a range of surgical and non-surgical treatments. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better, the Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 706, Why Your Brain Makes You Binge, with brain-based wellness creator Elisabeth Kristof.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. If you are brand new here, appreciate you checking it out. I am Amanda Valentine, and I host this podcast. A little bit about me is I spent most of my life obese. I spent over a decade yo-yo dieting. And then over the past decade, I kind of took things into my own hands. I live from the philosophy is make the best decision possible in every moment. And I've lost over 100 pounds and maintained over the past 10 years or so, which has completely changed my life and changed my career to now a certified personal trainer, certified nutritionist, along with some other certifications thrown in there, and podcaster. And with this podcast, I just want to try to help make your journey, whether that's health, wellness, weight loss, etc., mental health, everything, a little bit easier and give you great resources. So if you want to support me and this podcast so I can keep this going and keep getting great guests and giving you great information, you can support me on Patreon with my second podcast, because I didn't want to take anything away from Pound This. So the other podcast is called Pound Town. And you go to patreon.com/Pound Town Podcast. And that's where I'll go into deeper dive with some of my favorite Pound This guests. Also people from my radio career, including this week, my friend Kelly, who I did a morning show with in Denver, Colorado, who was there with me when I made the New Year's resolution to start getting healthy. So she kind of knows me right during that transition, and we discussed that. So if you want to support Pound This, please support Pound Town, patreon.com/Pound Town Podcast. All of that information is in the show notes. But let's get to today's episode, shall we? I'm very excited to chat with my guest today because what you do is just so incredibly interesting. And I feel like I have a million questions because I know that you deal with stress and burnout and everything else. I mean, we're talking about the brain here. There's a lot of topics. So I'm kind of, I'm ready to dive in and hear everything that you have to say. Elisabeth Kristof, thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
So tell me about all of your background. So you are a certified neurology practitioner, and I know that you kind of deal with the brain-based wellness and using, I mean, obviously that's a important part of all of this of, living a healthy lifestyle is the brain is involved. So tell me like where you began, what your inspiration and how you got to where you are now.
So yeah, I'm an applied neurology practitioner, or functional neurology is how some people refer to it. And I'm the founder of an online platform called Brain-Based Wellness. And I got into this field starting as a movement practitioner. I had a couple Pilates studios here in Austin for about 12 years. And I first started studying applied neurology to help people, athletes, perform better and to help people move out of chronic pain. And I implemented that in my teacher training program at the Pilates studio and in working with a lot of athletes and people in pain. And I started studying in an applied neurology institute in Arizona and fell in love with it right away. It really blew my mind, and understanding that all of the experiences that we have are really coming from our brain and from our nervous system. Learning that, as a movement practitioner, I had viewed everything from such a biomechanical standpoint, but you don't really have a tight hip flexor. You have a brain that is telling your hip flexor to maintain a certain amount of tension because your brain doesn't feel safe for you to make bigger movements. So it keeps that muscle tight, and you can stretch it all you want. You can foam roll it, but until you address the deficit in your nervous system or the neuropathway that's keeping that amount of tension in the muscle, it's just going to go back to the way that it is. And so I began to see really like our bodies are reflections of our nervous system, and understanding that all of us have this really miraculous, intelligent system inside of us, our operating system, which is our nervous system, and it is always changing, and it's always responding to the stimulus that we give it. And so I went on for many years working in that modality. And then really my life went through a major transition period where I experienced a lot of intense stress. I ended up having to dissolve my partnership shares in the business. There was a lot of financial stress. My fiance at the time was diagnosed with a cancer around his heart, and we went into fighting that battle. And it was just a time where I never really felt safe. I never knew if the floor was going to fall out from underneath me. There was very little sleep, always, living in hospitals, and just a lot of threat. And I started to experience some really severe outputs of my own nervous system. My binge eating got really severe. I was experiencing chronic pain and migraine. And I had this background of applied neurology, and I could recognize in myself signs of nervous system dysregulation before I experienced all of these outputs. And I also was watching my partner at the time and seeing his own dysregulated nervous system and trying to help him understand what was happening in his body. And I went into a long time of research of looking at books like Waking the Tiger and The Body Keeps the Score and Complex PTSD, and really understanding that everything we experience in our mind, we also experience in our body, and that those emotions and that trauma has to be processed through the body, has to be healed in the nervous system, and began my own long healing journey of using applied neurology and somatics and emotional processing to move out of some of those outputs and to change my behavior. And then started putting all that together, and brain-based wellness was formed.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, it's so hard too, to just try to think of rewiring your brain. So it feels like that's, such a task. And I want to get into the binge eating here for a second, but an example I wanted to bring up that happened to me last year and kind of get your thought process on this. So I went through a major career shift. I left my broadcasting career to pursue health and fitness full time after going through my own journey and lawyers and everything else. And then right after that happened, my lower back just totally tweaked out. Like I had sciatica problems. I couldn't move. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't lay down. I couldn't sit. I couldn't walk. Like everything was in pain. And I'm like, I didn't do anything physically too different. And even just at the time I was like, this feels like this is mentally related, that my body, and I'm like, but I don't know how to work out of this. Like, I don't know how to de-stress. I don't know how to, I'm going to physical therapists. I'm doing all of these things. I'm getting massages, et cetera, the best that I could in COVID in 2020. But it's so like, when you hear stories like that, like to me, that's obvious that's mental. That's my body. Like, you've gone through an insane amount of stress. Like, you ain't moving, girl. So like, how do you walk yourself through a process like that where you understand like your body is just, or your brain's taking control?
Well, I think there's so many really important things that you just touched on. And for a foundation, it's important to understand that we're just not as compartmentalized as we've maybe been taught to be. It's a system, right? We have a body, we have a nervous system, we have a brain, and those things are that you can't separate them from each other. They're always in play with each other, and it's one unified system. And the most important thing to your brain, to your nervous system, and to your body is your survival. And so our old brain, especially, I'm not talking about our prefrontal cortex, which is not really that responsible for all that much. I mean, it's our higher order thinking system. It's what makes us human. But all of our autonomic functions, all of the things that happen without our conscious awareness, our heart rate, our respiration, our resting muscle tone, all of that comes from your subconscious mind below the level of your consciousness. And that old part of the brain is primarily concerned with your survival, and it's always taking in all of this input from the world around you, from your eyes, from the balance system in your inner ear, from your body mapping system, from inside of your guts, and it's putting all of that information together, and it's using that stimulus, using that information to make a decision and generate an output. And it's deciding safe or unsafe all the time. It's deciding safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe. And if it feels unsafe, it's going to generate a protective output. And those protective outputs can look like pain. If you are experiencing pain, you're going to interact with the world less. You're going to take smaller steps. You're going to work out with less intensity. You're going to take less risks, right? And at the level of your old brain in that moment, because it lives in the moment, that is safer. It needs to reduce the amount of stimulus coming in. So pain is a great behavior change tool of your brain to get you to reduce the overall amount of stimulus coming in. It could also look like migraine. It could look like fatigue. It could look like tension in your muscles to reduce your range of motion because your brain doesn't feel safe making big movements. It could look like muscle weakness, or it could look like a binge. And all of these are tools that your brain uses to keep you safe. And just like you said, you went through this big period of change, and all change is inherently threatening to our old brain because our brain functions on pattern recognition to keep us alive. And so when we make it harder to use those patterns to generate predictions by changing something, that is threatening at a survival level to our brain. So you had all this change. You had the change of the pandemic. You had the career change. You had all the behavior changes that you'd made with your eating and your nutrition and your lifestyle. And so even if the change is positive, it is threatening to our brain. And so it will very likely start to generate some of those protective outputs like pain to keep you safe in that moment.
So how do you tell your brain to like, hey, chill, I got this. Get me out of pain, please, so I can function.
Totally. So we can't override it with our cognitive brain. And that's what happens to so many of us. I used to experience that all the time. I would be so frustrated, right? Like I got sober when I was 24. I'm 39 now. So I have a long time of, doing spiritual practices and having a daily discipline of meditation and all of these things. I've done a lot of therapy in my life. And so at a cognitive level, I had done a lot of work on myself, and I would still find myself in these behaviors like binge eating or pain. And it was so frustrating. I couldn't understand, like, I know better. Why can't I get past this? And it wasn't until I realized that I had to do stuff at the level of my body and my nervous system in order to really be able to achieve that pain. So there's two things that really start to make this change possible. And one is learning new tools for self-regulation. How do I give my nervous system and my body stimulus that it needs to feel safe and to start to move out of that sympathetic fight and flight threat response state of being, right? Because so many of us, especially when we're undergoing a lot of change, and if we have old unresolved trauma, we get stuck in states of hypervigilance, which is too much threat response going on and we can't get out of it. And then we have all this adrenaline and all this cortisol pumping all the time. Our muscles get tense, and our brains, our nervous systems, our bodies, they're intelligent, and they understand that too much stress for too long is dangerous. It leads to inflammation. It leads to an environment in your body that promotes disease, all that cortisol. And so again, they'll move into that protective mode to try to get you to move into more of a parasympathetic state, a calm and respond, a rest and digest part of your autonomic nervous system. And so if we can learn new tools to help our nervous system kind of modulate out of a too much sympathetic response into more of a parasympathetic rest and digest, calm and respond state of being, then we don't have to experience those protective outputs or those unwanted behaviors as much, because we have tools now to regulate ourselves, to move ourselves into that new state of being. So that's one of the things that you can do to start to make that change. So for example, I'll just give it a very easy thing that people can do is to start to work on their respiration. So there have been fMRI studies that show as few as 6 straw breaths can move you out of a heightened sympathetic state into more of a parasympathetic way of being. And that's just simply taking an inhale through your nose, a very gentle inhale through your nose, and then a long exhale through your mouth, where you purse your mouth like you're breathing out of a straw to create a little resistance for your exhalation. And you start to make your exhalations twice as long as your inhalation. So if you can, when you start to feel those signals of threat, muscle tension, racing thoughts, maybe your mouth gets really dry, you just start to feel those very first signals. If you can stop and just take some straw breaths, breathe in through your nose, long exhale out through your mouth, and see if you can just calm yourself a little bit, then you can start to interrupt those cycles of moving into hypervigilance and re-regulate yourself, so that then behavior change or pain reduction or not experiencing those protective outputs becomes more possible.
Well, it's so interesting how the brain works. Is like, for me, like I know the importance of breathing and on so many different levels, and I intellectually understand that. And in those moments, I'm like, oh, I should do some breathing exercises, but I'm still like, nope, and I still don't do it. Where I know that it works and I know it's helpful and I have tried it, but I still continually choose not to do it. Like, why am I like this?
Right. Yeah, totally. I feel that. So one of the things is you have to try to catch it earlier. So what I started to train myself with binge eating, for example, which I've been a binge eater my whole life, and I can talk more about the science of why that is really beneficial in a moment. But one of the most important things is I can't wait until I'm so dysregulated that I'm already in the binge, because it's too far. That's the straw breathing is not going to be enough at that point to re-regulate me. And in that situation, I just have to ride it out and be gentle with myself and say, like, I didn't catch it. It's okay. Can I look back and see if I experienced some more gentle, softer signals before I got to this state of being so dysregulated? So our body is always speaking to us, and it speaks to us quietly in the beginning. And if we ignore those signals and keep pushing through, it will get louder and louder until it forces us to change our behavior with extreme pain, with a binge, with a migraine. But for me, I started to look back at that behavior with curiosity. What was I experiencing before? And I get a little bit of pain in my left knee. That's a site of an old injury with a well-worn pain pathway. I get tension in the right side of my jaw, and I start to feel heavy and a little bit foggy. And if I can start to feel those signals early on, and then do some things that my nervous system likes at that moment before I'm so dysregulated, then I can interrupt it. And the better I get at that, the more easily I am able to avoid the behavior that I'm trying to move out of, because whatever we do, we get better at. That's a neurological principle too, because our bodies are wired for efficiency. And so they're going to go to a more well-worn path. And so if I'm always pushing myself into that state of dysregulation, then I'm actually getting better at being in that state of dysregulation. But if I get better at interrupting it, then I am also getting better at staying in more of a regulated state. So you have to have some patience with yourself. You have to do it over and over and over again, and start to train yourself to hear the softer signals before you've pushed so far into a dysregulated state that you can't override it.
So I guess to move backwards a little bit on the binging specifically, of like, that's some solutions, which, you know, you're a binge eater. I have a history of binge eating my entire life. I feel like that when people are binge eaters, I think that for a while you just think of like, I just have no self-control. I just love food so much. I can't, you know, I just don't have any willpower. And those are the messages that it seems like we give ourselves. I know I've been guilty of doing that. So what are the neurological reasons behind a binge? Like, where does that really begin? Because I personally don't believe it's born out of you just don't have any willpower.
It has nothing to do with willpower. So there's a couple things that are really important to address. And it's a complex issue. It's a multifaceted issue. And it's deeply rooted, right? Because food is so necessary for our survival. Our brain needs fuel and it needs oxygen to survive. And so if we've been depriving it and growing up in diet culture, it's a very normal and healthy response to rebel against that from our brain. So there's all that side of it. But at a very neurological level, binge eating does a couple things that are really important for our survival when we're dysregulated. So I come from a background of, I have quite a bit of childhood trauma. My ACE score is pretty high, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. And there's a lot of research that shows that people with high ACE scores experience more disease, cancer, autoimmune disease, mental health issues, addiction. And that is because that unresolved trauma dysregulates our nervous system. And too much dysregulation for too long is dangerous. We're meant to be able to handle a certain amount of stress. Our bodies are very resilient. But when we start to talk about chronic stress, especially the cortisol that comes with that, it leads to chronic inflammation in the body, which is shown to be a precursor for a lot of different diseases. And our body knows that it needs to get out of that state of pumping out cortisol all the time. It needs to move out of that sympathetic nervous system response. And a great way to do that is to eat a lot of food, because then you are modulating yourself back into that parasympathetic rest and digest part of your autonomic nervous system. You're taking yourself out of fight and flight by eating all of that food. And it's a self-regulation tool that is actually really effective for moving you out of a state of being, a state of nervous system being that is dangerous if you stay there for too long. And so I really reached a point where I understood, man, it was actually really adaptive for my body to use this tool to get out of that high stress state that was damaging my blood vessels, damaging my nerves, and creating a really unhealthy state inside of my body. It needed to regulate itself. And it could do that through food. And then also, every single neuron in our brain wants fuel and activation to stay alive. If you think of every single neuron as like its own little person, it wants to live. And in order to live, it needs both fuel and activation. And so with trauma, with chronic stress, doesn't even have to be like one big traumatic event, it can just be chronic stress over time. Certain important parts of our nervous system get damaged, especially our vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve 10. It runs from your brainstem all the way down into your pelvis. And this nerve is responsible for telling your brain signals from inside of your body, from your guts, that kind of tell your brain what's going on inside of your body. And it also is a key player in your parasympathetic nervous system, the calm and respond network. It's just a really important cranial nerve. And when that gets damaged, there's a part of your brain that is responsible for your interoceptive system that doesn't get enough stimulus. So our interoceptive system is just the system that tells our brain what's happening inside of our body. It's our ability to read the signals coming from inside of our body. And the vagus nerve is really important in that. And then there's an area of your brain called your insular cortex that takes all of that information in, and it integrates it and generates an output, whether that's pain or performance or a movement. It is responsible for integrating all of that information. Well, when you have interoceptive dysfunction and vagus nerve damage, that insular cortex does not get enough stimulation to stay healthy, to stay active. And so it's craving it. It wants fuel. It wants activation. And a great way to provide interoceptive stimulus to your brain, again, is to eat a bunch of food. It gives stimulus to that region of your brain. And so all of those behaviors are our brain's best way to get the fuel and the activation that it needs to keep all those different areas that are important to brain function healthy, active and alive. So in order to replace that behavior safely, in order to stop that behavior safely, we need new tools for self-regulation and new tools to provide our brain with the stimulus that it needs to stay healthy and active.
Well, I love that you brought up like the ACE score and all of that, because that's something I've been in the past couple of years taking a much deeper dive into. I also have a very high ACE score. I almost aced it, which is not a good thing.
Me too, my friend. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm currently reading The Body Keeps a Score and thinking about, trauma-informed body movement and stuff like that is been really huge for me in my own journey just in the past couple of years of understanding where my binges came from like, not only just, for me specifically, childhood traumas and stuff like that, but it feels like we kind of go through life not having these associations of like, I'm doing these unhealthy things, choices to my body, whether that's, of unhealthy food choice or how you're moving your body or drugs or anything else, and how that is informed by something that happened to you. How like, at least for me, I did not connect those things together of my binge eating and things that I went through, connecting that to traumatic events that I had been to in the past, again, in the mindset of just like, I just can't control myself. I don't have any willpower. So with all the people that you've worked with in the past and currently, do you feel like that's such a big marker of just having even your brain understand of like, this is where that's coming from when you're having this sort of behavior, clicking those pieces together of like, it's coming from this, especially going through COVID and everything else. So it's a level of trauma that we're all living through of you're making these decisions and these choices on your body because of your living or you have lived through this. And does that kind of like open some doors for a lot of people that you worked with to be like, I didn't even associate those things together?
Absolutely. I feel like it gives you a lot of space for self-compassion and understanding that we all do the best that we can at the level of our nervous system. And that in order to really start the deeper healing, the processing of emotions that get stored in the body, there's a lot of subconscious narratives that also lead to binge eating that I get into with my clients of kind of rewiring those and changing those internal scripts from deep core wounds. But before we can get into all of that and rewriting those narratives and processing the stress and the emotions of all of our life experiences through our body, we have to first feel safe in our body. We have to feel regulated in our nervous system. And so it's really, really important to learn tools for self-regulation and to learn how to safely come back into your body. For someone with a lot of trauma, it can even be threatening to just say, how does it feel in your body? Drop from your head into your body. Tell me what's going on inside of your chest. How does it feel in the bottom of your belly? How does it feel in your throat? And we need to be able to read the signals from our body. But first we have to make it feel safe. And so I use applied neurology to help people regulate and to help people train the deficits in their unique nervous system so that they can feel safe enough in their body to start to hear those signals. And then we can get into the deeper work of what am I carrying from my childhood? What are the scripts? What are the core wounds that are driving that behavior ultimately? And how do I rewire those? But first things first, let's regulate and let's feel safe.
So speaking of that, another thing, an issue that I'm dealing with movement with that is I have a really hard time having like the mind muscle connection of like being able to like feel my glutes in a workout. And from everything that I'm learning, which I'm asking you of like, is that also a trauma response of like that you can't, even if you're consciously, I'm going in a workout, I'm going to a yoga class, I'm going to a Pilates class, they're saying focus, like feel your core and feel these things. And you're just like, absolutely, it feels like numbness because I feel that myself. And then being a personal trainer now and dealing with clients that are like, I don't feel this. Is that also a trauma response? And then how do you rewire your brain to be like, no, it's okay to feel your own body and we can do this. Like that's something that I'm struggling with of like, again, that intellectual part of me, I'm like, yeah, I understand that's probably what's happening. I feel unsafe in my own body and I don't want to feel it, but I don't know how to like untangle those knots. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So definitely dissociation is a huge player in trauma response, and it becomes safer and adaptive often as children to leave our body. And then we don't come back and we don't have that felt sense inside of us. And it was very difficult for me, even as a mindful movement practitioner. Most of the time that I was in that world teaching, I was actually really dissociated from my body because I had not dealt with the trauma that kept me dissociated in the first place. And a lot of times I believe that we binge eat because it is one way that we are brought back into feeling our body. It's one way that it makes it possible for us to feel a sense of being grounded in our body. When you eat a lot of food, you start to have enough stimulus coming from your insides to actually feel it.
Yeah. That's
and
a great way to put it.
It's one of the only ways you can, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we start to safely feel into our body? And so for me, I've had to do it very, very gently and very slowly. I really believe that there's no such thing as going too slow in trauma healing. And I have to be careful because when I push too much too fast, I will actually experience autoimmune response. I'll get like eczema, or my joints will swell up, or I'll get a little bit of a fever. And I know that my body it's not safe for it yet. And so I have to back up off of it a little bit. And so what I do is I find one or two, I call them neural drills or neural exercises that my nervous system responds really well to and that make my body feel safe and relaxed. So I'll give you an example of one that tends to work really well for a lot of my clients is just doing tongue circles. Tongue circles help to activate that vagus nerve, that important cranial nerve, because it innervates at the back of our tongue. So if you just take your tongue over your teeth and you make a big circle and you try to go a little bit further back each time, you sit up nice and tall, relax your shoulders, and maybe do 5 circles in one direction and then 5 circles in the other direction. And just notice if your heart rate slows down, if maybe you get a little bit more saliva in your mouth, that's a good sign. That means you're moving into more of a parasympathetic way of being. If your muscles relax a little, if you just feel more calm and at ease. So that would be an example of maybe a drill that is high payoff for me. And I will do that drill to make myself feel calm, to regulate my nervous system. And then I will practice just 30 seconds of dropping from my head into my body with a lot of curiosity and just asking myself as many questions as I can. How does it feel in the bottom of my belly? Can I feel my ribs expanding with my inhale? Can I feel my heartbeat? Can I feel the space that my feet take up? Can I feel the bottom of my feet? Can I feel the energy of my hands? And I'll just try to feel as many sensations as I can. Can I feel where my body is making contact with the floor, with my seat? And I keep it small in the beginning for people, 30 seconds, 1 minute of dropping from your head down into your body. And then afterwards, do something else, do another neural exercise that your body responds well to re-regulate your nervous system and teach your brain from the body up that it is safe to do that. So maybe practicing some of those straw breaths afterwards, 6 straw breaths, so that you're continuing to learn how to drop into your body and read the signals that your body is giving you. But before you do it and after you do it, you're regulating your nervous system so that you're continuing to teach it. It is safe to do this. It's safe to feel these signals. It's safe to be grounded in the body. So that's one way. And then the other way is a lot of sensory stimulus. So like using a dry brush or a cloth and like rubbing on my body, or using the water from your shower and just like, giving yourself sensory stimulus on your skin and thinking about it at the same time and being like, this is my right hand, this is my right forearm, this is my right elbow, and using a really tactile sensory way to start to come into the body is also really positive for a lot of people.
Those are awesome. But it's crazy. As you're saying all this, my brain is saying like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work, of like how much you just fight yourself unchanged. Like your brain is just like, yeah, well, you're not happy with your behavior now, but let's not work to change it.
Totally. Yes, 100. So that's why also to keep it really minimal at first, like 1 minute a day. And so that it's not, people are already stressed and dysregulated. And I don't want to give someone like an hour-long morning practice when they're already in that state of dysregulation and stress. It needs to be manageable. It needs to be so easy that it almost feels like it's not even setting a goal, because it's so simple and so small and so easy that, like, why would I even set this as an intention? 1 minute a day. And then gradually build on it, because otherwise we just get overwhelmed and we don't do anything.
Yeah. Overwhelm is a big feeling for me too. And that's the same sort of neurological response of like, it just, everything just as everything else that we've discussed, is that's what like overwhelm is also, is your brain is just
Yes, I have some ideas about overwhelm. So one is, I think it's just we're under stress, and adding more to that is like your brain needs less stimulus. So it's going to resist more stimulus because it's trying to move into that protective mode. So if you can make it feel safer, there's less overwhelm with more things coming in. But also too, I think overwhelm can be a protective response of our brain when there's things that it doesn't want to have to change or to look at or to address. So a lot of what I work with my clients on as we get deeper into the work is emotional processing, especially the processing of anger and grief, because we live in a very like emotionally negative society where we're taught certain things are not good to feel, right? Yeah. And so, or maybe we learn in childhood that our emotions are too big, that they scare people, or we get punished if we express emotions, or we just start to fear our own emotions, fear our own anger. And so we suppress a lot of that. And it can feel very scary to start to let it come out. And so I think a lot of times overwhelm is when there's an emotion that we do not want to look at and to come out, especially anger. And so our brain can do that as a distractive mechanism to keep us from being present in our body, experiencing the feeling, because it just doesn't feel safe yet. And so it just starts to distract us.
So isn't it in those moments of overwhelm, is that also a good time to do the straw breathing?
That's a great time to do the straw breathing. It's a great time to do the straw breathing. And if you can, and once you've learned some tools for self-regulation, to start to follow and look for like what's going on underneath that. And I do a lot of EFT tapping, which is tapping on different acupressure points in the body to move some energy through. And so maybe like doing some tapping and just questioning yourself, like, what am I really experiencing? What am I really feeling? Can I connect to my body in this moment? And using the overwhelm as a signal that like, hey, there's something here that maybe wants to be released, that wants to come out, but I'm a little bit scared. So can I find a way to do that safely?
So from learning and studying all of this, and obviously you're helping others with this, like how much has all of this information and knowledge changed your life?
So very much. I lived most of my life prior to the past, few years, cycling through states of hypervigilance, hyperarousal to hypoarousal to shutdown, right? Like I would just push and work and do until I was exhausted, and I would crash with a binge and a migraine, and then I would get up and do it all over again. And I would just cycle through those states forever. That's just how I thought life was. I thought that's just what people do. You just push and then you crash, and you push and then you crash. And so starting to learn that that was all parts of my dysregulation and parts of my protective mechanisms from these deeper core wounds that were driving my behavior has allowed me to stop those cycles, to stop doing all the time, and to start to come back into my own body, into my own felt sense, to be present in the world with people, to not overdo, to be able to get out into nature and to live my life as a fully expressed human being. I'm able to feel emotions, all of them, grief and anger, but also because I am able to now feel and process grief and anger, I'm also able to really experience joy and relaxation and connection without having to get that from food. And so I have the ability to experience this full spectrum of human emotion that I did not have before. My relationships are very different. My relationship to my business is very different. And more than anything, I'm present. I'm present in the world. And I think most of my life, I was not.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations. And
thank you.
Is that something that...
It's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. I feel you. Is that something that you've done completely on your own, or did you reach out and did you have people help you along the way and give you advice?
A lot of help. A lot of help. I believe all healers need their own healers too, right? I mean, you can't, especially if you're holding space for other people and their healing, you also need people to hold space for you. And, my education has been primarily with Z Health Institute in Arizona, which is an applied neurology institute. And so I've done a lot of study with them. But then I've also worked with vagus nerve experts. Melanie Weller is a wonderful vagus nerve expert that is a mentor of mine and a colleague. And I've had my own neuro coaches and my own somatic therapists and my own EFT practitioners that I work with for myself. And when I'm not working with them, I also have like coaches in my own company that we will do the work with each other, for each other, so that I'm not just doing it on myself.
That's amazing. I think that's such an important message, and one that I share on this podcast a lot, of just like, it's okay to ask for help. Because again, it feels like that's also another mental roadblock, is it's, don't be weak, don't ask for help. You can figure this out on your own. Don't burden anybody else with your stuff. And I feel like that's its own super toxic, unhealthy pattern that I've spent a lot of my life in too. That's like, no, like you can't do this on your own. You've already proven that. Like, just have someone help you already, damn it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have that same pattern in my life. And I had one of my teachers, one of my therapists tell me, you have gotten through your whole life relying on your intellect. And that's why you've studied all of this so much to figure it all out, and you push through with your intellect, but you are still completely frozen in your limbic system, which is your emotional center. And you're still stuck in fight and flight in your old brain. And that's why you're having all of this autoimmune, because you understand it all cognitively, but you haven't been able to bring it into your own body and into your own life. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, and I realized that in order for me to really heal, I had to live the work. I had to bring it into my own body, and I needed help to do that. I couldn't just figure it out. I needed a safe space and a safe container to really bring my body and my nervous system on board with all of the healing and not just think about it all.
So is that something where when you got, you heard that statement and that made a whole lot of sense to you, which I'm having that moment right now with you. Of like, then is it just become like the beginning steps of like, okay, I'm going to work on this. This is something that's important. Mm-hmm. Does it just be like, okay, I'm going to schedule out that minute a day? Is that where it just starts of like, okay, so I'm putting this in my calendar. I'm making this is a can't miss sort of thing of to be in touch with myself and to kind of work through these things and make sure I take the time no matter what every day to focus on this. Yep,
that's it exactly. It became a non-negotiable, and also, small steps leading up to those bigger changes, so that I had the capacity to handle more and to handle more and to handle more, but doing it in a really gradual way.
So how long has this process been going on for you now?
This deeper level of healing has been going on for me probably about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
I've been working on my nervous system since 2015, doing the applied neurology, and really that led me to many levels of awakening. It made big changes in me just doing the applied neurology, but then I reached a point too where I had to take it to a deeper level in really getting into the unresolved trauma, into the core wounds, into the subconscious narratives. And that came through a lot of somatic work and EFT work. And that has really just been the past 4 or 5 years.
So with clients that you work for, like, tell me what that looks like. Like, what things do you offer to work through, and what avenues do people have to pursue that?
Yeah, so I have a membership site, and that is kind of the foundational level of all of this work. So I'm on the site live daily, and we do nervous system training and somatic processing live together. We also do movement classes because that's also my longtime area of expertise, and I believe movement is important for brain health and stress processing. So the membership site, we get together daily. We do 30 minutes to an hour, 15 of nervous system training and movement. And that is just to set a new baseline level of function for your nervous system, to process stress through the body, and to learn how to move with a lot of integrity and alignment. And then I also do 2 small group training programs. I do one for people with disordered eating called Food Freedom. And then I do one for entrepreneurs who are suffering from burnout and exhaustion, pain, and migraine. And that is a deeper dive into, yes, we do nervous system training, but we also really look at the deep beliefs and the core wounds and the subconscious narratives, and how to rewrite those at the level of our subconscious mind, in our body and in our nervous system, to get out of the behaviors that are dysregulating us in the first place.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, sign me up.
Come on, I would love to have you.
Yeah, I need it. So I'm definitely looking into that. So where do people go to get more information, to sign up? Or I imagine if somebody had a specific question that you would, respond to them with an email, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find me is through the website, which is brain-based-wellness.com. And if you go there, I have a free video series that you can sign up for, and it'll teach you a little bit more about how to assess and reassess what works for your own nervous system, what nervous system training even is, and it'll teach you 5 drills, 5 neural exercises that I have found to be really beneficial for a large number of my clients, so that you can start that morning practice and just see how it feels in your body. Because I really want people to have access to these tools and to experience it in their own body. So it's totally free, and you can do it in about 5 minutes a day to start to really make some changes for your own nervous system.
That's amazing. Well, I'll have all of that in the show notes, and I can't thank you enough for chatting with me, because this has been...
Thank you for having me.
Incredibly helpful. You spoke right to my soul. So this podcast is for everybody. This was for me.
Well, that makes me happy to hear, and I really appreciate your having me on. I love having these conversations.
Yes, well, thank you so much, and hopefully we can chat again.
I would love that.
AmandaValentineBites.com